The new CEO called me overpaid at the board meeting. Most people get a gold watch when they retire. I got a security escort and a lawsuit. Julian calls me the ghost in the machine, but he's about to learn why you never fire the person who knows where the bodies are buried. While the board is upstairs popping champagne, I'm in the parking lot with one finger on the delete key. 12 years of his father's legacy is tied to a single line of code that only I can stabilize. I'm giving him 10 minutes to realize his mistake. Or the entire empire becomes a 404 error. They say you can hear the sound of a company dying if you listen closely enough. Most people think it's a loud noise, a stock market crash, a factory closing its gates, a frantic shouting match in a boardroom. But it's not. It's much quieter than that. It's the sound of a pen hitting a mahogany table. It's the sound of a cold breeze whistling through an office that used to be full of laughter. It's the sound of silence from the people who used to call you family. My name is Elena. For 12 years, 3 months and 4 days, I was the heartbeat of Etheria. I remember the early days. California was different then. The air in Palo Alto felt like it was made of pure electricity and hope. We started in a garage. Cliché. I know, but it was our garage. I built the first lines of the Etheria logic while sitting on a plastic milk crate, drinking lukewarm coffee and shivering because we couldn't afford the heating bill. I stayed when the servers crashed at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. I stayed when my marriage hit the rocks because I was married to the code. I sacrificed my sleep, my health, and the best years of my life for a dream that wasn't mine. I was the ghost in the machine. The one who kept the lights on while the founders took the stage and the applause. And I was fine with that. Because I believed in the work. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares when the dreamer dies. When Arthur, the founder and the only man who truly understood what I contributed, passed away last year, the soul of Etheria died with him. And in his place came Julian. Julian, the legacy CEO. It was Tuesday morning. The boardroom was ice cold. It's funny how the richest people always want the room to feel like a refrigerator. Julian sat at the head of the table, wearing a suit that cost more than my first 3 years of salary combined. He wasn't looking at the people in the room. He was looking at a tablet. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He didn't acknowledge that I had just pulled a 36-hour shift to fix a breach in the firewall that would have cost the company millions. You're late, Elena. I wasn't late. I was exactly on time. But with men like Julian, if you aren't already bowing when they enter the room, you're late. I took my seat. The board members, men and women I had known for a decade, people I had helped through divorces and health scares, wouldn't meet my eye. They stared at their legal pads like they were looking at the secrets of the universe. Julian finally looked up. His eyes were like 2 pieces of flint. No warmth. No history. Just math. I've been reviewing the Q3 overhead. Specifically, the legacy contracts. And I have to say, Elena, I'm confused. You're listed as lead systems architect, but looking at our daily logs, the system is automated. It runs itself. Yet, you're pulling a 7-figure salary plus equity. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked around the table. Still no one spoke. The system is automated because I built it to be, Julian. But it requires manual optimization every 24 hours to account for market volatility. Without that, the algorithm drifts. It loses its edge. Drifts? It's code, Elena, not a boat. You're talking like it's a living thing so you can justify your paycheck. Let's be honest. You're overpaid. You're an expensive relic of my father's era. A thank you note that has become too expensive to keep on the desk. An expensive relic. 12 years of my life. 12 years of building an empire that put a private jet under his feet, and I was a relic. Most of you watching this right now are the Elenas of your world. You do the work, you take the hits, and you wait for a thank you that never comes. But here's the difference. I didn't stay and beg. If you're the kind of person who would let Julian walk all over you, then close this video. But if you have the courage to see how a queen takes back her throne, subscribe. Right now. Don't think. Just do it. And if you're too weak to join us, leave a comment and tell everyone why you're okay with being a relic. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air conditioning hummed a cold, clinical sound that felt like it was vibrating in my teeth. So, here's the deal. We're restructuring. I'm moving your department to a firm in Bangalore. We can get 10 of you for the price of one. I'm offering you a graceful exit. 2 weeks severance, which is more than you deserve, and you hand over your master keys today. Or, we can do this the hard way. The hard way. I looked at the chief financial officer, Marcus. I had saved Marcus's job 3 years ago when I caught an accounting error that would have sent him to prison. He looked at his fingernails. I looked at Sarah, the head of HR. We had shared drinks every Friday for years. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the ceiling. That was the moment. The moment the heartbreak turned into something else. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was a cold, crystalline clarity. They didn't just want my job. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to see me break so they could feel better about their own cowardice. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood up. The chair made a soft scritch sound against the floor. You're right, Julian. I am very expensive. I reached into my bag and pulled out my company phone and my encrypted keycard. I placed them on the table. And you're about to find out exactly why. I'm not taking the severance. I'm not taking the graceful exit. I'm just leaving. Good. Save us the paperwork. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Relic. I walked to the door. I didn't take my favorite mug. I didn't take the photo of me and Arthur from the day we went public. I left it all. Because I knew something Julian didn't. I knew that the Aetheria logic wasn't just code. It was a symphony. And I was the only one who knew how to conduct it. Julian thought he was buying the instruments. But he just fired the only person who knew how to play them. I walked out of that building and into the bright California sun. I got into my car, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, counting. 1, 2, 3. I opened my personal laptop. I didn't have to hack anything. I just had to stop. I clicked one button, a script I had written 5 years ago as a safety measure for Arthur. It was called the Sunset Clause. I watched my screen as the Aetheria revenue ticker, the one I had synced to my private account years ago, began to flicker. The revenue didn't drop yet. But the drift had started. And in 48 hours, Julian wouldn't be worried about my salary. He'd be worried about his life. I sat in my car for 45 minutes. My hands were still gripped at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the black leather. I watched the glass tower of Aetheria. From the outside, it looked the same. The sun reflected off the windows like a shield. It looked invincible. But I knew better. I've spent 12 years looking at the guts of that building, the servers, the fiber optics, the logic gates. I knew that at this very moment upstairs in the boardroom, they were laughing. They were probably opening a bottle of overpriced scotch to celebrate trimming the fat. I finally turned the key. The engine hummed to life. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Home was filled with the ghosts of the time I had stolen from myself to give to them. Instead, I drove toward the coast. I needed the ocean. I needed something that didn't run on a binary code. As I drove, I thought about the Sunset Clause. When Arthur was alive, we talked about the future. He was a visionary, but he was also a realist. He knew his son, Julian, was a destroyer. Arthur used to say, "Elena, some people build cathedrals just to see if they can burn them down for the insurance money." He had me write a failsafe. Not to destroy the company, never that, but to protect the intellectual property if the leadership ever violated the core mission. Julian's speech today wasn't just an insult, it was a legal trigger. By calling my work automated relics and firing me without cause, he had inadvertently signed a document he hadn't even bothered to read. You see, the Aetheria algorithm isn't a static piece of software. It's a predictive engine. It processes 3 billion data points a second to determine where to bid on digital real estate. But the market? The market is a chaotic, breathing beast. Every 24 hours, the algorithm tilts toward the highest bidder. To keep it stable, I had to manually input the gravity constants, a set of variables I calculated based on my own proprietary research. Without those constants, the algorithm begins to drift. It starts bidding on ghost traffic. It starts spending $10 for every $1 it makes. My phone started buzzing around 4 p.m. It was Marcus, the CFO. The man who couldn't look me in the eye 3 hours ago. I didn't answer. I put the phone in the cup holder and watched the screen light up again and again. Then came the texts. "Elena, the dashboard is showing a 0.8% discrepancy in the North American spend. Is there a server update running? Call me." Beifengerling dem Ba. To a layman, that sounds like nothing. To Julian, it probably looked like a rounding error. But to me? That was the first pebble falling before the landslide. The algorithm was starting to lose its gravity. It was floating away from reality. By 11 p.m., I was sitting on my deck in Half Moon Bay. The fog was rolling in, thick and salty. I had my laptop open, but I wasn't logged into their systems. I didn't need to be. I was watching the public-facing API. I saw the latency spikes. Ethereum's clients, Fortune 500 companies, retail giants, tech conglomerates were paying for precision. But tonight, the precision was gone. The algorithm was placing ads for winter coats in Florida. It was bidding on luxury car keywords for users who were searching for how to file for bankruptcy. My phone rang. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was Sarah from HR. Hi Elena. I'm so sorry about how today went. Julian was. Well, you know how he is. Listen, we're having a little trouble accessing the optimization vault. Could you just hop on a quick Zoom and walk the junior devs through the handshake protocol? The junior devs. Julian had replaced me with a team of 20-somethings who knew how to code but didn't know how to think. They were looking for a door, but they didn't realize I had moved the entire house. I'd love to help, Sarah. But as Julian pointed out, I'm an overpaid relic. And relics don't do Zoom calls. Besides, I'm officially on my 2-week severance, right? I think I'll spend it at the beach. Elena. Wait, the spend is up $40 million in the last 3 hours and the conversion rate is 0. Julian is screaming. If you just... I hung up. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was swallowed by the memory of Sarah looking at the ceiling while Julian humiliated me. You don't get to stand by while the house is set on fire and then complain about the smoke. Wednesday morning. The sun rose over the Santa Cruz Mountains, but for Ethereum, it was the start of a total eclipse. I checked the news. TechCrunch was already reporting unusual volatility in Ethereum's ad networks. The stock price, which had been the pride of Julian's life, was down 4% in pre-market trading. I made myself a cup of expensive Kona coffee. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. No 3 a.m. alarms. No frantic calls about server uptime. But then, the aggression started. By noon, I received a formal cease and desist via email. Julian's lawyers were accusing me of active sabotage and theft of company secrets. They claimed I had planted a virus before I left. They didn't understand. I didn't have to plant a virus. I was the immune system. When you remove the immune system, the body dies all by itself. I replied with a single sentence. Please refer to the Intellectual Property Clause Section 4.2 of my original 2013 contract signed by Arthur Vance. That clause was my nuclear option. It stated that if I was ever terminated without cause or through organizational restructuring, the rights to the gravity constant calculations reverted to my private LLC. Julian hadn't just fired an employee. He had fired his landlord. He was currently using my patented math to run his business, and he didn't have a lease. I spent the afternoon watching the carnage. Ethereum's biggest client, a global soft drink brand, pulled their $50 million a month account. They cited unreliable targeting and massive budget waste. The revenue ticker on my screen was no longer flickering. It was diving. Fu Baifinja Shur. Fu Baifinja Arshar. Fu Baifinja Senshawu. The company was hemorrhaging cash. Julian was probably in his office, throwing chairs, blaming the junior devs, blaming the old servers, blaming everyone but the man in the mirror. That night, the silence of my cabin was broken. Not by a phone call. I looked at my security monitor. A black SUV was parked in my driveway. Julian stepped out. He didn't have his suit jacket on. His tie was loose. He looked like a man who had spent the last 24 hours in a war zone. He didn't come to the door to apologize. I saw him reach into the back seat and pull out a heavy, leather briefcase. He looked at my front door with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't knock. He pounded. Elena. Open the door. I know what you're doing. You think you can hold my company hostage? I'll have you in a federal cell by morning. He still didn't get it. I wasn't holding his company hostage. I was watching it burn. And the only thing in that briefcase was the gasoline. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. In the woods of Half Moon Bay, that silence is usually peaceful. But tonight, it felt like a coiled spring. Julian was still outside, pounding on my door like a man possessed. He wasn't the polished, legacy CEO I had seen in the boardroom 36 hours ago. He was a desperate animal. And desperate animals are the most dangerous because they have no floor. They'll drop as low as they need to go to survive. I know you're in there, Elena. You think you're smart. You think you can sabotage a multi-billion-dollar entity and just hide in the woods. I have the FBI on speed dial. Open this door. I didn't move. I sat at my kitchen island, a glass of red wine in one hand and my tablet in the other. I was watching the Aetheria internal Slack channels. I still had read-only access through a backdoor account Julian's junior geniuses hadn't found yet. The channels were in full-blown panic. The bidding logic is inverted. One dev wrote, "We just spent $200,000 on a bot farm in Latvia." Another screamed. I stood up. Slowly. I didn't turn on the porch lights. I wanted him to feel the darkness. I walked to the door and pulled it open just as he was about to swing his fist again. Julian stumbled forward, nearly losing his balance. He looked terrible, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled like expensive gin and cheap sweat. There she is. The relic. Do you have any idea what you've done? Our revenue is down 40% since yesterday. Our lead investors are calling for my head. You're going to log back in right now, and you're going to fix the drift. Or what, Julian? You'll fire me again? You'll call me overpaid in front of a group of cowards. Or I'll ruin you. I've already filed the paperwork. We're suing you for $500 million in damages. Sabotage, breach of fiduciary duty, intellectual property theft. You'll be in court for the next 20 years. I let out a soft, melodic laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes a man realize he's walked into a trap. I stepped back and motioned for him to enter. He marched in, slamming the leather briefcase onto my wooden table. Open the briefcase, Julian. I want to see what $500 million in damages looks like. It's a court order, Elena. Sign the emergency reinstatement contract or this goes to the judge at 8 a.m. I didn't look at his papers. Instead, I turned my tablet around and pushed it toward him. On the screen was a document from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. That's patent number 9,452,108. The Vance-Elena gravity constant method. Do you see the owner listed at the bottom? Julian squinted at the screen. I watched his eyes scan the text. I watched the moment the blood left his face. It didn't say Aetheria. It didn't say Arthur Vance. It said, Elena Rossi, LLC. Your father was a genius, Julian. But he was also a man of his word. He knew that if the company ever fell into the hands of someone who didn't value the architecture, the architect should have the right to take her tools and go home. I didn't steal your code. I am the code. And right now, every second your servers run that algorithm, you are committing patent infringement on a global scale. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the embers popping in my fireplace. Julian's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a fish gasping for air. This is a fake. My father would never. He would never give away the core IP. He didn't give it away. He licensed it. For $1 a year. A license that, according to paragraph 12, terminates immediately upon the wrongful termination or hostile displacement of the lead architect. You didn't just fire me, Julian. You cancelled your own lease on the only thing that makes you money. I leaned in close. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. So, here is how this goes. You can call the FBI. You can call your lawyers. But by the time they finish reading that patent, Aetheria will be worth less than the glass it's built from. You aren't suing me for $500 million. I am suing you for every penny you've made since 10:15 a.m. yesterday morning. Most people are afraid of the Julians of the world. They think a big title and a loud voice mean power. But real power? Real power is knowing exactly what you're worth and having the receipts to prove it. If you're tired of being the one who builds while others take the credit, you need to be here. Subscribe to the channel. Don't be the one left behind when the relics start taking back what's theirs. If you're too scared to stand up, well, the comment section is for the spectators. Tell me why you're okay with being Julian's footstool. Julian slumped into my kitchen chair. The bravado was gone. The legacy CEO was shrinking before my eyes. What do you want? Money? I'll double your salary. Triple it. Just give me the override code. The board is meeting at midnight. If I don't have a fix by then, they're going to trigger the incompetency clause and strip my shares. I looked at him. I thought about the 12 years, the missed birthdays, the 3 a.m. server crashes. The way my heart used to race every time Arthur praised me. I don't want your money, Julian. I have my own. What I want is for you to feel what I felt. I want you to feel unnecessary. Elena, please. We're a family. No. We were a company. And you fired the only person who cared about the family. I walked him to the door. The fog had settled in, thick as a shroud. Julian turned back one last time, his face a mask of desperation. This isn't over. I'll find a way to break that patent. I'll hire the best engineers in the world to reverse engineer your math. I'm sure you will. But Julian, look at your watch. The algorithm enters its death spiral phase in exactly 3 minutes. By the time your engineers find the first line of code, there won't be a company left to save. I shut the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. The real ghost wasn't in the machine anymore. The ghost was standing in my kitchen, pouring another glass of wine, watching the empire fall. After the door clicked shut on Julian, the silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like an empty house. I leaned my back against the wood of the door and let myself slide down until I was sitting on the floor. The adrenaline that had kept me upright, the fire that had fueled my voice was gone. And in its place was a cold, hollow ache. 13 years. I had spent more time with the Etheria code than I had with my own mother. I knew every quirk of the logic gates like the lines on my own palm. And now, I was watching it die. I was the one who had pulled the plug. People think revenge tastes like champagne. They think it's sweet. But revenge tastes like ash. It tastes like the realization that you've just burned down the only home you've known for a decade just to keep the person who kicked you out from staying warm. I looked around my cabin. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was built with Etheria money. Every beam, every stone, was a piece of my life I had traded away. I thought about Arthur. Elena, look at this. We aren't just selling ads. We're building a nervous system for the world. You're the one who makes it breathe. Don't ever let them tell you you're just a coder. You're the architect of the future. Arthur had been the father I needed. When my own father passed away during my junior year of college, Arthur was the one who handed me a tissue and told me to get back to work, not because he was cruel, but because he knew the work would save me. And now his son was using that same work as a weapon. And I was using it as a shield. I stood up, my joints stiff. I needed to move. I needed to feel like a person again, not a lead architect or a relic. I walked over to the small pile of mail I had neglected for the last few days. It was mostly junk. Bills I didn't need to worry about. Catalogs for things I'd never buy. But at the bottom of the stack was an envelope that made my heart stop. It was thick, cream-colored. It had no return address, but the handwriting was a series of sharp, elegant slants. It was Arthur's script. But Arthur had been dead for 6 months. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a letter opener. This wasn't a legal notice. This wasn't a bill. This was a voice from the grave. I pulled out the stationery. It was dated 1 week before his heart attack. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and more importantly, it means Julian has finally done exactly what I feared he would do. He has mistaken your kindness for weakness, and your silence for absence. I felt a tear track down my cheek. He knew. He had known all along. I spent my life building Etheria, but I spent my final years worrying about its soul. Julian has my blood, but he doesn't have my vision. He sees a gold mine. You see a garden. He will try to pave over it, Elena. He will try to pave over you. I sat back down at the table, the letter trembling in my grip. In the bottom drawer of my desk at the office, the one with the false back, you will find a small black drive. It isn't code, Elena. It's a key. Not to the servers, but to the truth about how this company was funded in the early days. If the sunset clause isn't enough to stop him, this will be. Use it only if you have to. Because once you open that door, there is no going back to the garden. A key. A truth. I looked at my laptop screen. The Etheria revenue ticker had just hit -48%. The death spiral was accelerating. The company was screaming for help, and I was holding the only cure and now, apparently, a detonator. I checked my watch. 1 a.m. The Etheria HQ would be a madhouse right now. Julian would be there. Marcus would be there. The junior devs would be crying over their keyboards. But the executive wing, Arthur's old office, would be empty. Julian had moved into the new glass suite on the top floor, leaving his father's relic of an office untouched because it smelled like the past. I didn't want to go back. I had walked out with my head high. Going back felt like crawling. But Arthur didn't write this letter for me to be proud. He wrote it for me to be a steward. I grabbed my coat. My keys. I didn't look at the revenue ticker again. I didn't care about the 61% drop anymore. That was just math. What was in that desk? That was history. I drove back toward Palo Alto. The fog was so thick I could barely see past my own hood, but I knew the way by heart. I had driven this route 10,000 times. As I pulled into the shadows of the Etheria parking garage, I saw a fleet of black sedans parked out front. These were government plates. The death spiral hadn't just attracted the board's attention. It had attracted the regulators. And if I didn't get to that desk in the next 20 minutes, the secret Arthur left me wouldn't be mine to keep. It would belong to the state. I stepped out of the car, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee anymore. I was a thief in my own house. Red. The light on the scanner was red. I had stood in front of this glass side entrance 1,000 times. I'd walked through it in the rain, in the heat, in the glow of success, and in the shadow of exhaustion. But tonight, for the first time in 12 years, the building didn't recognize my pulse. It didn't recognize my name. To the sensors, I was a ghost. A trespasser. I looked over my shoulder. The fleet of black sedans out front was still there, their engines ticking as they cooled in the night air. Men in dark overcoats were moving through the main lobby, carrying empty crates. The SEC? The DOJ? It didn't matter. When a tech giant loses 61% of its value in 48 hours, the sharks don't just circle, they bite. I moved toward the loading docks. I knew the service elevator had a manual bypass that was older than Julian's entire career. It was a mechanical relic, just like me. The air inside the service corridor smelled like industrial cleaner and old cardboard. It felt like the guts of a beast that was dying from the inside out. As the elevator creaked upward toward the executive floor, I could hear the echoes of the chaos above, shouting, the frantic clatter of keyboards. The sound of a dream being torn apart. I stepped out onto the 4th floor. This was the old wing. The carpets were thicker here, the lights dimmer. Julian had abandoned this place for the glass and steel penthouse, calling this floor stuffy and obsolete. I walked toward Arthur's office. My heart was a drum, beating against the walls of my chest. The door was locked. Of course it was. I reached above the door frame, my fingers searching the dust until they found the small magnetic keybox Arthur had kept there for emergencies. My hand shook as I turned the lock. The room smelled like Arthur, old paper, expensive tobacco, and the faint scent of the peppermint candies he used to keep in his pocket for when the board meetings went too long. I didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight through the blinds cast long, skeletal shadows across the desk. I moved quickly. I didn't have time for nostalgia. I knelt behind the heavy oak desk and felt for the false back in the bottom drawer. My fingernails caught on a seam. I pulled. There it was. A small, black USB drive. It looked so insignificant, a piece of plastic no bigger than a thumb, holding enough weight to crush whatever was left of Julian's world. I didn't leave. I couldn't. I had to know what Arthur was protecting me from. I sat in his old leather chair, the one that still felt like a hug, and plugged the drive into my laptop. My screen glowed, illuminating the tears I didn't realize I was crying. The drive only had one folder. It was titled, The Foundation. I opened the first file. It wasn't code. It wasn't a patent. It was a series of wire transfers from 15 years ago. Etheria hadn't been started with a small loan from Arthur's family, as the official biography claimed. It had been started with money from a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company owned by a man Arthur had spent his whole life trying to distance himself from, Julian's maternal grandfather. A man who had built his fortune on the backs of workers in sweatshops and illegal data harvesting. Oh, Arthur. You didn't build a garden. You built a fortress on a swamp. The money was dirty, and Julian knew. I saw the more recent files. Julian had been using Etheria's algorithm to scrub the records, to launder the history of the company's funding. That's why he needed the junior devs. They didn't know enough to ask questions. They just followed the logic. But then I saw the final file. A video. I clicked play. The video was grainy, recorded on a laptop camera. It was Arthur, sitting in this very chair, looking tired. His face was gray. Elena. If you're watching this, then the worst has happened. Julian has found the transfers. He thinks he can use the company to hide the family's sins. I tried to stop him, but he's my son. And I was weak. The algorithm you built. It's too pure for this, Elena. Don't let him turn your life's work into a washing machine for blood money. If you have to burn it down to save its soul, burn it. I give you my blessing. And I give you the truth. The truth. The revenue drop wasn't a mistake. The death spiral wasn't just my revenge. It was a mercy killing. Suddenly, the heavy office door slammed open. I didn't even have time to close my laptop. The lights flickered on, blinding me. Standing in the doorway wasn't Julian. It was Marcus, the CFO, and two of those men in the dark overcoats. Marcus wasn't looking at his fingernails anymore. He was looking at the black drive in my hand. You should have stayed in the woods, Elena. We could have settled for the patent, but you just had to look in the drawer, didn't you? He didn't sound like a CFO. He sounded like a guard, and I realized then. Julian wasn't the only one who knew about the swamp. The whole board was standing in the mud. You know that feeling when you're walking through a dark house and you realize you aren't alone? That cold prickle at the base of your spine that tells you the hunter has become the prey. I felt it the moment Marcus stepped into the light. Marcus wasn't the man who looked at his fingernails anymore. He looked solid, dangerous. The two men behind him didn't look like federal agents. They looked like fixers. The kind of people you hire when a legal problem becomes a physical one. Elena. You always were too smart for your own good. Arthur loved that about you. But Arthur is gone. And the world he built? It needs to keep turning. Hand over the drive. I looked at the laptop. The video of Arthur was still paused on his tired gray face. I looked at the drive. Then I looked at Marcus. You knew, Marcus. All those years, when we were celebrating record growth and innovative funding, you knew it was laundered money from the Costa family. You didn't catch an accounting error 3 years ago. You were hiding one. The world is a dirty place, Elena. We just provided the soap. Now, give me the drive, and you can walk out of here. I'll even make sure Julian's lawsuit disappears. You can go back to your cabin and live like a queen on your patent royalties. It's a win-win. A win-win, that's what they call it when they buy your soul and give you a receipt. I didn't reach for the drive. My hand stayed on the keyboard. You forgot one thing, Marcus. I built the security for this entire floor. Including the relic elevator. What are you talking about? I hit a sequence on my laptop. Control plus Shift plus F12. The service elevator I had used to get up here? I just remotely engaged the emergency fire stop. It didn't just stop the elevator. It locked every electronic door on the 4th floor. The lights in the hallway turned a deep pulsing red. We're in a dead zone now, Marcus. No Wi-Fi. No cellular. And the only person who can unlock those doors is currently sitting in Arthur's chair. I saw the mask slip. For a split second, Marcus looked afraid. The two men behind him reached into their jackets, but Marcus held up a hand. He knew. He knew that if I felt threatened, I could delete the contents of that drive with one keystroke. You think you're going to stay here forever? Julian is upstairs with the board. They'll notice the lockdown. Let them notice. By the time they get a locksmith in here, I'll have uploaded the foundation folder to every major news outlet in the country. My laptop is already set to a dead man switch. If I don't enter a code every 10 minutes, the truth goes live. It was a lie. I didn't have a dead man switch set up yet. But in the dark, with red lights pulsing against the walls, people believe in monsters. And right now, I was the biggest monster in the room. I saw Marcus's shoulders sag. He was a numbers man, and the math wasn't adding up in his favor. What do you want, Elena? If you release that, the company dies, your 51% stake. Your patents. They'll be worth 0. You'll be the queen of a graveyard. Elena's time. I've lived in a graveyard for 12 years, Marcus. I'm used to the smell. I want Julian out. Tonight. An emergency resignation for health reasons. And I want the board to sign over the legacy ethics oversight to my firm. We're going to clean the swamp. Starting with you. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but he was interrupted. My heart stopped. That wasn't a digital crash. That was physical. I looked at my laptop. The internal sensors were screaming. Someone hadn't waited for a locksmith. Someone had used a breaching charge on the server room 2 floors up. That's not us. Elena. Julian is losing his mind. He's trying to destroy the physical drives before the regulators get to them. He's going to burn the whole building down. The death spiral hadn't just hit the revenue. It had hit Julian's sanity. And as the smell of smoke began to drift through the vents, I realized my small victory was about to become a literal inferno. The smell hit me before the heat did. It was the smell of ozone, melting plastic, and old paper. The smell of 12 years of work being vaporized. Julian wasn't a CEO anymore. He was a scorched earth general. He knew that if he couldn't have Etheria, if he couldn't hide the Foundation files, then no one would. He was burning the evidence and he didn't care if we were still inside the box. Elena. Unlock the doors. The ventilation is pulling the smoke straight down from the server room. We'll suffocate before the fire even reaches us. I looked at my laptop. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing through 1,000 lines of code. I could unlock the floor, but the main elevators were dead. The stairwells would be chimneys for the smoke. The service lift. I didn't just lock it, I jammed the governor. Marcus, if you want to live, your fixers need to use those crowbars for something other than intimidation. We have to pry the inner doors open and climb the cable to the 3rd floor fire exit. It's funny how fast a power dynamic shifts when the air starts to run out. The man who wanted to disappear me 5 minutes ago was now looking at me like I was his only god. We climbed. My muscles screamed. The grease from the cables stained my hands black, the same hands that had written the code that built this tower. I looked down into the abyss of the shaft and felt a strange sense of irony. I was literally climbing out of the hole I had helped dig. As we scrambled onto the 3rd floor landing, gasping for clean air, I saw something that made me freeze. In the dim emergency light of the hallway, a figure was standing by the server junction box. They weren't wearing a suit. They were wearing a tech vest. It was Sarah. Sarah. My Friday night drinks friend. The head of HR who had looked at the ceiling while I was fired. She was holding a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. Sarah? What are you doing? The building is on fire. Sarah didn't jump. She didn't look guilty. She looked bored. She turned the tablet around. I'm finishing the job, Elena. Julian is a distraction. He's the loud noise everyone looks at while the real work gets done. Did you really think Arthur left that letter by accident? Did you really think he forgot to tell Julian about the patent? My heart didn't just break. It disintegrated. Arthur didn't want you to save the company, Elena. He wanted you to trigger the sunset clause. He knew that once the IP reverted to you, the company's value would plummet, allowing the Foundation partners to buy back the shares for pennies on the dollar. You weren't his steward. You were his detonator. He used your loyalty to ensure his family's debt was wiped clean by a total collapse. Every memory of Arthur, every word of encouragement, every peppermint moment was a lie. He hadn't protected me because he loved me. He had protected me because I was the only one who could legally pull the pin on the grenade without it tracing back to him. I was the relic he had polished just so I would be shiny enough to bait Julian into a fight. And now I'm wiping the servers. Not for Julian. For the partners. We don't need the Foundation files existing in any version. Thank you for opening the door to the office, Elena. I couldn't get past the biometric lock without a Rossi signature on the internal network. She had used my infiltration as the handshake to bypass the final encryption. I hadn't come back to save the soul of the company. I had come back to be the final accomplice. Sarah tapped the final command on her tablet. It's done. The servers are zeroed. The Foundation is a ghost. Goodbye, Elena. Enjoy your patents. They're the only thing left of your life. She turned to run toward the fire exit, leaving Marcus and me in the smoky dark. But she forgot one thing. She forgot that I don't just write code. I write poetry. You zeroed the servers, Sarah. But you didn't check the ghost partition. I grabbed Marcus by the collar. Move. The building is going. But I just sent a 60 terabyte burst to a satellite server in Switzerland. Sarah didn't wipe the truth. She just pushed Send for me. As we burst through the final fire door and into the cool night air, I looked back at the flaming tower. I wasn't the architect anymore. I wasn't the steward. I was the one with the match. And I was just getting started. The world thinks I disappeared in the fire. In the chaos of the Etheria collapse, amidst the sirens and the falling glass, I became a ghost. The news reports talked about the tragic end of a tech titan. They showed footage of Julian being led away in handcuffs for reckless endangerment, his face hidden behind a designer jacket. They mentioned me as a missing casualty, a name on a list. But I wasn't dead. I was in a safe house, a cabin in the high Sierras that Arthur didn't know about. No one knew about it. I sat in the dark for 3 days. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the 60 terabytes of data I had pulled from the fire. Sarah thought she had wiped the slate clean for her partners. She thought she had used me to delete the foundation files. What she didn't realize is that when you fire a systems architect, you don't just lose an employee. You lose the person who built the mirrors. I hadn't just saved the data. I had mirrored it across a decentralized network. The partners, the men behind the curtain who used Arthur as a front, were currently celebrating a victory that didn't exist. I stood up and walked to the wall. I had pinned up a massive sheet of butcher paper. At the center was a single name, the Vesper Group. This was the foundation. They weren't just investors. They were vultures. They specialized in corporate rebirthing, buying companies with dirty histories, burning them down to erase the debt and the crimes, and then selling the clean IP to the highest bidder. They had used Arthur. They had used Julian. And they had tried to use me. You wanted a clean slate? I'm going to give you a bloodbath. My strategy wasn't going to be a lawsuit. Lawsuits are for people who believe in the system. I was going to use the one thing I had that they couldn't buy, the gravity constant. Without my optimization, the Vesper Group couldn't sell the Etheria logic. It was a Ferrari without a steering wheel. And I was about to show them exactly how fast they were heading toward a cliff. Step 1. Isolation. I reached out to Marcus. He was hiding in a motel in Nevada, terrified for his life. He knew too much, and the Vesper Group doesn't like loose ends. Marcus. Stop running. You can't outrun people who own the satellites, but you can hide behind someone who knows how to blind them. Elena? How are you alive? Sarah said. Sarah is a puppet, Marcus. And puppets eventually get their strings cut. I'm sending a car to your location. You're going to give me the encryption keys to the Vesper offshore accounts, or I'm going to leak your location to Julian's fixers in the next 5 minutes. Loyalty is a myth. Interest is the only reality. Marcus gave me the keys. Step 2. The bait. I leaked a rumor to the dark web, a snippet of code that looked like a fix for the Etheria drift. I knew Vesper's analysts would find it. They were desperate. They needed to show their buyers that the IP was still viable. But the code I leaked wasn't a fix. It was a Trojan. A logic bomb wrapped in a beautiful, mathematical gift box. Once they ran that code on their private servers, I wouldn't just have their data, I would have their identities. The names of the board members. The politicians. The men who thought they could play God with people's lives. I watched my monitor. The bait had been taken. The Vesper Group's primary server in Zurich had just downloaded the logic bomb. I saw the connection stabilize. I saw the directory tree begin to unfold. I have them. But as I scrolled through the names of the Vesper directors, my heart stopped. There at the very top of the list wasn't a name I didn't know. It was a name that made me drop my coffee cup. No, that's impossible. He died. The person running the Vesper Group, the person who had orchestrated the entire fall of Etheria, wasn't a stranger. It was the one person I thought I was doing this for. They say that when you die, your life flashes before your eyes. But what they don't tell you is what happens when a lie dies. When a lie dies, the world doesn't flash. It freezes. I stared at the screen. The logic bomb had done its job. It had bypassed the biometric layers, shredded the shell companies, and pulled the mask off the Vesper Group's primary shareholder. The name on the digital certificate wasn't an estate. It wasn't a trust. It was a living, breathing identity. Arthur Vance. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the glass of the monitor. I traced the letters of his name, Arthur. The man whose funeral I attended. The man whose casket I watched descend into the cold California soil. The man whose final letter I had cried over just nights ago. He wasn't a victim of Julian. He wasn't a relic being pushed out. He was the architect of the fire. I began to dig. My fingers flew across the keys, not with the grace of a coder anymore, but with the desperation of someone trying to dig themselves out of a grave. I found the hospital records. Arthur's heart attack had happened in a private wing he funded. The attending physician? A board member of a Vesper-owned medical group. The cremation? There were no records of a body, only a signature. Then, I found the live feed. The Vesper Group's Zurich headquarters had a high-security penthouse. I used the Trojan to hijack the internal security camera. The screen flickered, grainy and gray, before snapping into high-definition clarity. There he was. Arthur. He looked younger. Healthier. He was sitting on a terrace overlooking the Swiss Alps, sipping a glass of wine. He wasn't mourning Aetheria. He was watching the news of its collapse on a massive screen, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. You monster. Everything clicked into place. The sunset clause wasn't a protection for me. It was a kill switch for the company's debt. By having me trigger it, Arthur wiped out billions in liabilities, erased the paper trail of the Foundation's blood money, and allowed him to die as a hero while reborn as a ghost billionaire. He didn't just use Julian as a distraction. He used Julian as a scapegoat. He knew Julian was incompetent. He knew Julian would bully me. He counted on it. Arthur had played me like a fine instrument. He knew my loyalty. He knew my heart. He used my love for him to make me the most effective weapon in his arsenal. Suddenly, the camera feed on my screen changed. The image of the terrace vanished, replaced by a black screen with a single white cursor. A VoIP call request began to pulse. I didn't want to answer. I wanted to run. But my hand moved on its own. I clicked accept. I expected the logic bomb, Elena, but I expected it to take you at least another 48 hours. You've gotten faster. Hearing his voice was like feeling a ghost's breath on my neck. It was the same warm, fatherly tone he used when he told me I was the architect of the future. You're alive. I'm more than alive, Elena. I'm free. Aetheria was a cage. Julian was a burden. And you were the key. You did exactly what you were born to do. You protected the work. You brought it home to me. I didn't bring it to you. I'm going to burn it. I'm going to send this video, these files, and your death certificate to every agency on the planet. And say what? That a dead man is running a Swiss hedge fund. Elena, look at the data again. The files you stole from the office? The 60 terabytes. Look at the metadata. I opened the metadata for the Foundation files. My breath hitched. The timestamps had been altered. Not by Sarah. Not by Julian. But by the logic I had written years ago. The files didn't look like they belonged to Arthur or Vesper. Because of the way I had saved them during the fire, the digital signature on every single incriminating document was mine. If those files go public, Elena, I don't go to prison. I'm already dead. You go to prison. You're the one who triggered the crash. You're the one with the offshore servers. You're the one who stole the data. Now, are you going to keep playing the martyr? Or are you ready to come to Switzerland and take your seat at my side? Arthur always told me that the greatest weakness of any system is the human element. He thought he was the architect of my life. He thought he had mapped out every neuron in my brain, every impulse of my loyalty. He forgot one thing. I didn't just build the Aetheria logic. I built the mirror. And a mirror doesn't just reflect the light. It can be angled to burn the person holding it. I sat in the darkness of the cabin for 3 minutes after he hung up. 3 minutes of absolute stillness. I looked at the metadata, the digital fingerprints that pointed straight at my chest. He was right. On paper, I was the villain. I was the one who had tanked a $500 million company and walked away with the secrets. You want me at your side, Arthur? Fine. But you should know. I never liked being second. Narrator. I didn't book a flight to Switzerland. Not yet. If I went to him now, I'd be a prisoner. I needed to move the pieces on the board while he was still celebrating his resurrection. I opened a new terminal window. This wasn't the bait I had used before. This was the deep tissue logic. Arthur's wealth was tied to the Vesper Group. Vesper's wealth was tied to the Foundation assets, billions in laundered capital, hidden in dark pool trading accounts. These accounts don't use banks. They use high-frequency trading algorithms to move money faster than the eye can see. I looked at the code for Vesper's trading floor. It was beautiful. Elegant. It was based on a version of my own work from 5 years ago. Arthur thought he had the gravity constant. But what he didn't know was that I had developed a 0-point variable 3 months ago. A piece of math that doesn't just stabilize the drift. It creates a vacuum. If I can't clear my name, I'll make the name Arthur Vance so toxic that even the devil won't want to touch his money. Execution. Stage 1. I reached out to Sarah. I knew she was hiding in a corporate safe house in San Francisco, waiting for her payout from Vesper. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I simply overrode the smart home system in her penthouse. I turned the lights to a pulsing, deep red, the same color as the emergency lights in the office. I played the sound of the server room explosion through her high-end speakers. Who is this? Elena? Please, I was just doing what I was told, Arthur said. Arthur isn't coming for you, Sarah. He's already replaced you. But I'm still here. And I have the logs of every file you wiped. If you want to live to spend your payout, you're going to do one thing for me. Fear is a powerful compiler. Sarah gave me the biometric bypass for Arthur's private Swiss server. She thought it would save her. She didn't realize I was just using her as a bridge. With Sarah's bypass and the 0-point math, I began the injection. I wasn't stealing his money. I was relabeling it. Every dollar in the Vesper accounts was being tagged with the original blood money source codes I had found in the Foundation files. I was effectively unlaundering his entire fortune in real time. To the Swiss banks, it would look like a massive, sudden influx of terrorist-linked capital. The mirror was working. Arthur wanted me to be the face of the crime? Fine. I would be the face. But I was going to make sure the money he wanted me to manage was radioactive. Have you ever watched a fire start from a single spark? Most people spend their lives trying to put out the fires around them. I decided to be the spark. Arthur thinks he's the god of this machine, but he forgot that I'm the one who wrote the Bible. If you're ready to see how a god falls, if you're ready to see the legacy burn once and for all, subscribe. Right now. This isn't a story for the weak. This is for the ones who know that sometimes, you have to become the monster to kill the creator. If you're staying on the sidelines, don't complain when the world gets cold. Tell me in the comments, who do you fear more? The man who built the tower, or the woman who knows where the demolition charges are? I watched the progress bar. 88%. 92%. 95%. Suddenly, my screen went white. A single line of text appeared in the center of the void. Do you really think I only have one mirror, Elena? My security cameras outside the cabin went dark, one by one. I looked out the window. High-intensity spotlights cut through the mountain mist, blinding me. Arthur wasn't waiting for me in Switzerland. He had sent the retrieval team to my front door. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a prisoner. And I was out of time. The journey to Switzerland wasn't a flight. It was a blur of black hoods, pressurized cabins, and the metallic taste of fear in the back of my throat. They didn't hand me over to the police. They didn't take me to a cell. They took me to a sanctuary. When the hood was finally pulled off, I wasn't in a dungeon. I was in a room made of glass and white stone, suspended over a valley of clouds. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And it felt like a tomb. At the center of the room stood a desk, a sleek, minimalist slab of obsidian. And behind it sat the ghost. Welcome home, Elena. You look tired. The mountain air in California is far too thin for a mind as heavy as yours. He looked exactly the same. The same kind eyes that had watched me code for a decade. The same steady hands that had handed me a peppermint when I was close to a breakthrough. Seeing him alive wasn't a miracle. It was a violation. You let me mourn you. I stood at your grave, Arthur. I spoke at your funeral. I cried for a man who didn't exist. Oh, I existed, Elena. But the man you knew was a servant to a dying empire. The man you see now. I am the empire. He stood up and walked toward me. He didn't move like an old man. He moved like a predator who had finally cornered the only thing that could challenge him. You were always my favorite creation, Elena. Not the code, not the company. You. I molded you. I gave you the sunset clause like a father gives a child a toy, knowing exactly when you'd play with it. I needed someone the world trusted to destroy Etheria so I could rise from the ashes. You did perfectly. I felt the heat rising in my chest. It wasn't the heat of the fire this time, it was the heat of a star collapsing. You used me to launder blood money. You used me to ruin Julian. You used me to hide your sins. Was any of it real? The 12 years? The mentorship? It was all real. That's why it worked. If I hadn't loved you, you wouldn't have been loyal enough to be my weapon. He reached out to touch my face, a fatherly gesture that made my skin crawl. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm not your weapon anymore, Arthur. I'm the 0-point variable. Did you check your Vesper accounts before I was retrieved? I saw it then. A tiny flicker in his eyes. A shadow of doubt. He turned back toward his desk, his fingers tapping the obsidian surface. A holographic interface shimmered into existence. He watched the red lines. He watched the unlaundering I had started in the cabin. It hadn't stopped just because they captured me. I had built the script to be recursive. Every time a Vesper security wall tried to block it, the script multiplied. What have you done? You're flagging these accounts for the International Monetary Fund. You're destroying the very capital you were meant to manage. I'm not destroying it. I'm returning it to its owners. The sweatshops. The harvested data victims. The people you stepped on to build this sanctuary. I'm making you visible, Arthur. A ghost can't be seen. But a criminal can. Arthur's face transformed. The kindness vanished. The father died and the Vesper group took his place. He leaned over the desk, his voice a low, terrifying growl. You think you're a hero? If these accounts go dark, the global markets will shudder. Thousands of innocent employees will lose their pensions. You're not just killing me, Elena. You're killing the world I built for you. Stop the script. Now, or you'll never leave this valley. I walked toward the glass wall, looking out at the clouds. I felt lighter than I had in years. Let them shudder. Better to feel the ground shake than to live on a foundation of lies. I already entered the final handshake, Arthur. The only thing that stops the leak is my heartbeat. If I stay here as your prisoner, or if I die. The world gets the foundation files in 10 minutes. Arthur stared at me. He looked at the red numbers on his desk, then at the 2 guards by the door. I saw his hand reach into the desk drawer. Not for a peppermint. Then let's see how fast your heart can beat, Elena. The glass walls didn't shatter. They turned opaque. The room began to vent oxygen. He wasn't going to kill me. He was going to put me in a coma until his hackers could find the bypass. He was going to keep my heart beating, but keep my voice silent. The air didn't just disappear. It felt like it was being pulled out of my lungs by a vacuum. Arthur sat behind his obsidian desk, watching me with a look of clinical curiosity. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just waiting. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't even a human being. I was a server that needed to be put into sleep mode so he could patch the code. Don't fight it, Elena. The more you move, the faster the CO2 builds up. Your heart will keep beating. The script will stay dormant. And by the time you wake up, the world will have forgotten there ever was a foundation leak. My vision began to blur at the edges. The white stone walls felt like they were closing in. I slumped against the opaque glass. I looked at my hands, the hands that had built this empire. I had 10 minutes. 10 minutes before my brain lacked the oxygen to process logic. 10 minutes before the 0-point variable became my own death warrant. I looked around the room. It was state-of-the-art. Everything was wireless, haptic, and encrypted. But I knew Arthur. He was a man of the old world. He didn't trust anything he couldn't touch. I crawled toward the obsidian desk. Arthur didn't move. He thought I was begging. You always said. Never trust. The cloud. Underneath the desk, hidden behind the sleek aesthetic of the Vesper group, I felt a familiar texture. A cold, iron bolt. This room wasn't built from scratch. It was a retrofit of an old Swiss military bunker. And in the 1970 seconds, bunkers didn't use digital ventilation. They used manual pressure relief valves. I found the handwheel. It was painted over, fused with decades of white lacquer. I gripped it with both hands, my muscles screaming for the oxygen they didn't have. I twisted. The paint cracked. Arthur's expression changed. He realized I wasn't reaching for him. I was reaching for the building's skeleton. He stood up, slamming his hand on the desk, trying to override the manual bypass from his terminal. It won't work. That system has been decommissioned for 20 years. You. Decommissioned. The software. You can't. Decommission. Physics. The pressure slammed into me like a physical blow. The opaque glass walls didn't shatter, they cracked. Cold, mountain air flooded back into the room. I lay on the floor, sobbing, drawing in lungfuls of the sweetest, thinnest air I had ever tasted. I thought I had won. I thought the rush of air meant I could run. But as I tried to stand, I felt the sharp sting in my neck. One of the guards had recovered. He wasn't using a gun. He had used a sedative dart. My legs turned to water. I hit the floor again, but this time, the world didn't go dark because of a lack of oxygen. It went dark because of chemistry. As my eyes drifted shut, I saw Arthur walking toward me. He looked disappointed. He knelt down, his face inches from mine. You almost had me, Elena. But you forgot that in my world physics is just another variable I can buy. You're going to sleep now. And when you wake up, the Rossi name will be a synonym for the greatest terrorist attack in financial history. My eyes closed. The last thing I heard wasn't Arthur's voice. It was the sound of a notification on his desk. A high-pitched, urgent alert that he didn't expect. Warning. 0-point protocol has detected a heartbeat deviation, initiating global broadcast in T-60 seconds. He thought he had to keep me alive to stop the leak. He didn't realize I had set the leak to trigger if my heart rate dropped too low. I was already a ghost. And the ghost was about to speak. They say the last thing to leave you when you die is your hearing. But when you're brought back, it's the sound of the world screaming. I woke up on a cold floor. The white stone of Arthur's sanctuary was gone. I was in a medical wing, wires snaking from my chest to a monitor that was currently flashing a frantic neon yellow. The sedative was still a thick fog in my brain, but the air was full of noise. I pulled the sensors off my skin. Rip. 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 I looked at the television mounted on the wall. My own face was staring back at me. But it wasn't a mugshot. It was a video I had recorded in the cabin, a just-in-case file that the 0-point protocol had released the moment my heart rate dipped below 40 beats per minute. If you are seeing this, the man known as Arthur Vance is alive. And he is currently holding the world's economy hostage from a bunker in the Alps. Here are the receipts. I staggered to the window. The opaque shield was gone. Below the peak, I didn't see clouds. I saw lights. Dozens of them. Not the soft glow of a village, but the sharp, aggressive blue and red of tactical response teams. Arthur had wanted to be a ghost. I had turned him into a lighthouse. Every news outlet, every regulatory body, every whistleblower site on the planet had just received 60 terabytes of the cleanest, most damning evidence ever compiled. The Foundation wasn't a secret anymore. It was a headline. But there was one more thing. Something I hadn't even known I'd sent. As I watched the news, a document scrolled across the screen. It was a secondary encryption layer from the black drive, one that Arthur hadn't even told me about. It was the real reason he needed me to trigger the sunset clause. Etherea's logic wasn't just for ads. The gravity constant had a secondary application. It was being used to manipulate the digital results of the upcoming federal elections. Julian wasn't just a scapegoat. He was the distraction while the Vesper Group installed their own variables into the very fabric of democracy. Arthur hadn't just built a company, he had built a remote control for the country. And I was the one who had unknowingly polished the lens. The door to the medical wing burst open. It wasn't a guard, it was Sarah. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. Her tech vest was torn, and she was clutching a tablet like a life preserver. Elena, you have to stop the feed. The Vesper partners. They aren't just businessmen, they're mercenaries. They've activated the clean sweep protocol. They're coming to wipe this entire facility off the map, Arthur included. I looked at her. The woman who had betrayed me. The woman who had watched me suffocate. Let them come. I've already sent the coordinates to the Swiss Guard and the Interpol task force. There's nowhere for the partners to land that isn't already a crime scene. You don't understand. Arthur. He's in the server vault. He's trying to trigger a physical meltdown. He'd rather burn us all alive than let that data reach the final node. I grabbed a metal tray from the medical cart, not for protection. I needed the reflective surface. I looked at Sarah. Stay here if you want to live. I'm going to find my father. And I'm going to show him what happens when you teach your daughter how to build a fire. The building shook. The lights flickered and died. In the darkness, the only thing I could see was the red emergency light on the server vault door. My home. My prison. My stage. There's a myth that justice is a set of scales, that it's a quiet, balanced thing decided in a room with wood-paneled walls and men in robes. That's a lie. Real justice is a furnace. It's loud, it's violent, and it's absolute. I reached the vault door. It was a 6-ton slab of reinforced titanium, designed to survive a nuclear strike. Behind this door lived the mirror, the election rigging logic, the blood money ledgers, and the man who thought he could play God with a keyboard. I didn't try to hack the keypad. I didn't have time to play with the digital locks while the clean sweep mercenaries were painting the hallways with lead. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the metal tray from the medical wing. You taught me to use the light, Arthur. Let's see if you remember the lesson. I positioned the tray against the high-intensity laser of the biometric scanner. By angling the reflection, I created an optical feedback loop. I wasn't entering a code. I was overloading the sensor with its own light. The door hissed open. The server vault was a cathedral of blinking blue lights and cold, humming air. At the very end of the row, Arthur was standing in front of the master console. He wasn't typing. He was holding a manual override key, a physical rod that, when turned, would trigger a thermal purge. He was going to melt the silicon into slag. Stay back, Elena. I've already initiated the purge. In 60 seconds, there won't be a single bite of evidence left. I'll be the only one who knows the truth, and I'll be the only one who survives the fallout. You won't survive, Arthur. Even if you melt the drives, the zero-point protocol is already outside your walls. It's in the clouds. It's in the headlines. You're just burning the ashes. Not the headlines I'm interested in. If these servers melt, the election variable activates a failsafe. It won't just rig the vote. It will delete the voter registrations of 40 million people. Total chaos. While the world burns, I'll walk out of here in the confusion. I saw the madness in his eyes. He wasn't a genius anymore. He was a small man clutching a hot rod in a cold room. I didn't run at him. I ran at the cooling system. Arthur thought he was the only one who knew the physical architecture. But I was the one who had designed the liquid nitrogen cooling manifold. I grabbed the emergency pressure release. You want a purge, Arthur? Let's have one. But we aren't using heat. We're using the cold. The room vanished in a white cloud of sub-zero mist. I felt the skin on my face tighten as the temperature plummeted. I could hear Arthur screaming, his voice muffled by the fog. I moved through the mist like a ghost. I knew the floor plan. I knew where the master override was. I reached the console just as Arthur's hand, shaking and frostbitten, tried to turn the thermal key. I grabbed his wrist. My hands were warm. His were ice. Goodbye, Father. I didn't turn the key. I pulled it out of the console and threw it into the dark. I hit the archive all button. The servers didn't melt, they froze. The election variable didn't activate. It was isolated in a digital block of ice, preserved for the investigators who were currently breaking down the vault's outer perimeter. The Swiss Guard burst in. The clean sweep mercenaries were gone, either dead or fleeing. I stood in the center of the mist, the black drive in my hand, watching the soldiers pin Arthur Vance to the floor. You destroyed it. All of it. For what? For a world that will never even know your name. They don't need to know my name, Arthur. They just need to know the truth. And the truth is, you're overpaid. I walked out of the vault, past the guards, past the chaos. I didn't look back at Arthur. But as I reached the exit, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A private, encrypted message from an unknown number. The Vesper Group was just one head of the Hydra, Elena. We're looking forward to meeting the woman who cut it off. It wasn't over. It was just an audition. They say that when a storm passes, the air is the cleanest it will ever be. But it's also the coldest. The aftermath of the Vesper collapse wasn't like the movies. There was no victory parade. There was only a long, grueling silence followed by months of depositions, headlines, and the slow, agonizing process of unweaving a billion-dollar lie. I stayed in Switzerland for 3 weeks, not as a prisoner, but as the state's key witness. I sat in rooms with gray walls and drank bitter coffee while men in suits asked me to explain the math of a dead man's soul. I gave them everything. Every line of code, every shell company, every name on the foundation list. Except for one. Arthur Vance didn't survive the winter. Not physically. The man who had died once before found that the second time was much more permanent. He suffered a stroke in a high-security medical ward 2 days after his arrest. He died alone. No family. No legacy. Just a name on a federal indictment. Julian, on the other hand, Julian proved that incompetence is its own kind of armor. He claimed total ignorance. He threw his father and the board under the bus so fast it made the prosecutors dizzy. He walked away with a slap on the wrist and a lifetime ban from the tech industry. Last I heard, he was trying to start a wellness retreat in Tulum. Etheria was dissolved. The assets, the servers, the patents, the buildings were seized and moved into a public interest trust. It's no longer a company. It's an archive. A museum of what happens when you let the gravity constant pull you too far into the dark. I moved back to California. Not to Palo Alto, not to the glass towers. I bought a small house near the cliffs where the trees grow sideways because of the wind. People ask me if it was worth it. They see the headlines about the 61% revenue crash and they call me a hero of the working class. Or they see the market instability I caused and they call me a digital terrorist. They don't see the nights I spend staring at my hands, wondering if I'm still the person who sat in that garage 12 years ago. You can't dismantle a monster without getting its blood on your own skin. I won. I got my justice. But the price of that justice was the only life I knew. I opened my laptop today for the first time in a month. I didn't check the stock market. I didn't check the news. I checked the ghost partition, the one Sarah thought she wiped. There was one file I hadn't opened. A private log Arthur had kept during my first year at the company. Elena Rossi is different. She doesn't code for the money. She codes for the beauty of the logic. I have to be careful. A mind like hers. It can't be bought. It can only be directed. I will give her a garden to tend to. And one day, I will ask her to burn it. I hope she forgives me. He knew. From the very first day. He didn't just hire a coder. He hired a sacrifice. I closed the laptop. I walked out to the edge of the cliff. The sun was setting over the Pacific, turning the water into a sheet of liquid gold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black USB drive, the one with the foundation files, the one with the mirror logic, the one that the mysterious Hydra group wanted me to bring to them. I didn't throw it. I dropped it. I watched it disappear into the foam. But as I turned to walk back to my house, I saw a black sedan parked at the end of my driveway. A woman was leaning against the hood. She wasn't Sarah. She wasn't a guard. She was wearing a tech vest with a new logo, one I had never seen. You really thought a little salt water would stop the signal, Elena? We didn't want the drive. We wanted the woman who had the guts to throw it away. There is a moment in every story where the protagonist has to decide if they are a character in a book or the hand holding the pen. I looked at the woman leaning against the black sedan. She wasn't a fixer like Marcus's men. She wasn't a puppet like Sarah. She had the look of someone who had survived the same fires I had. The logo on her vest was a simple geometric circle, the symbol for zero. The Vesper Group was a dinosaur. Elena. Arthur Vance was a man trying to rule a digital world with a physical mind. But the people I represent? We don't want to rig elections. We don't want to launder blood money. We want to decentralize the gravity you created. We want to give the steering wheel back to the people. It was the same pitch Arthur had given me in the garage 12 years ago. The same promise of a better world. I've heard the sermon before. It usually ends with a server room on fire and a body in a vault. I'm done being the architect for other people's cathedrals. We aren't asking you to build a cathedral, Elena. We're asking you to be the watchdog. You have the 0-point logic. You're the only person on Earth who knows how to spot the drift before it starts. Stay here and watch the sunset if you want, but the world is still tilted. And you're the only one who knows how to level it. I watched her drive away, leaving a business card on the hood of my car. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I walked back into my house and sat in the dark. I thought about the journey from that boardroom in Palo Alto to the mountains of Switzerland. I thought about being called overpaid, a relic, and a ghost. Here is the truth they don't tell you in business school. Your value isn't what they pay you. Your value is what it costs them to replace you. Julian thought he was saving money by firing me. He thought the system was the asset. But a system is just a set of instructions. Without the soul of the person who built it, without the ethics, the intuition, and the gravity, the system is just a machine waiting to break. I wasn't overpaid. I was the only thing standing between them and the abyss. And when they decided I was an expense, I simply stepped aside and let them see what the abyss looked like. My revenue didn't come back in dollars. It came back in freedom. I realized that Arthur hadn't molded me. He had just provided the friction I needed to sharpen my edges. He thought he was the master, but a master doesn't fear his student's heartbeat. A master doesn't hide in a bunker. I am Elena Rossi. I am not a legacy. I am not a victim. I am the architect of my own silence, and my own noise. I picked up the business card from the car. It didn't have a phone number. It had a line of code, a handshake protocol for a server located in the one place no government can touch, a private satellite. I looked back at the ocean. I could stay here. I could be the woman who took down a titan and disappeared into the mist. I could finally have the peace I thought I wanted. But the world is still drifting. And I still have the math. Let's see if we can't level the playing field. You've been with me for 4 hours. You've seen the betrayal, the fire, and the truth. You've seen what happens when the overpaid worker decides to walk out. If you're still here, it's because you know that you're an Elena too. You're the one who keeps the lights on while the Julians take the credit. This is the end of my story, but it's the beginning of yours. If you haven't subscribed by now, you've watched a masterclass in self-worth and ignored the lesson. Don't be the person who watches the revolution from the sidelines. Subscribe. Join the ones who know their value. And in the comments, leave one word. Unstoppable. Tell the world that you're done being a relic. The drift is over. The real work begins now.